Morning.
Morning.
John 17 is one of those chapters, and there are ministers, when you ask them questions, they can quote Bible passages from you, and when you say, where do you find this? And they know, I have never been one of those ministers. But John 17 always stands out for me. Because John 17 is the prayer of Jesus. And it's the longest prayer we have of Jesus. And the whole chapter is Jesus praying. He kind of starts by praying for himself and what he is going to do. But then he moves and he prays for his disciples. And the end part of John 17 is when he prays for those who will believe because of the work of the disciples. He prays for us. But I'm always moved at how passionate Jesus is when he is praying for his disciples, because these people have meant something incredibly important to him. They have walked with him through the highs and the lows, through the goods and the bads, and even knowing that they're going to scatter like the wind, even knowing that they are flawed and broken people, he loves them incredibly and cherishes what they bring and what they do and how they have glorified him and God. And every time I hear it, I'm reminded that I think we do Jesus sometimes a disservice, because we see Jesus as complete, as having everything put together, as fully divine. But in this passage, we're reminded of the fully human as well. And the need for others, the need for community, the need not to walk alone. And for Jesus, you see all the times, even when he goes up to the garden to pray before, he brings them with him. They fall asleep. He wakes them up, they fall asleep again. But still, he brings them there, as flawed as they are, because it is better to be with these flawed disciples than to be by yourself. And I am struck by how even Jesus needs a community, needs people around him, needs people that will walk with him. And again, with Jesus there, all the attention's on Jesus, rightfully so. But when Jesus in the book, in the chapter in Acts, when Jesus goes up to heaven, what's the first thing that the disciples do? They gather together. We never quite know, like, did the disciples, how do they get along? And sometimes, there's kind of back and forth between them, and we see their humanness. But even in their humanness, they understand the value of gathering together in that upper room, of Jesus is gone, and suddenly, Jesus was gone, they scattered, and then they came back together, and then Jesus appeared with them again, and they were like, wow, Jesus is with us, and then Jesus goes again. But what's their instinct? Their instinct is to gather together, because they know they need each other, as broken, as flawed, as strange as they are. Our society has often glorified the lone wolf, the Chuck Norris, if you will, the one who can take on everyone that comes at them. We glorify the individual in a way that hero worship, if you will. But the reality is, we are so much stronger together. We are so much more when we come as our individuals and we gather in a community. I'm always, my brain is weird. And it's strange sometimes where I come up with, you don't have to nod like that. Yeah, you just cut that too. Both of them on, I was like, oh yeah. But some of the analogies so World War II, that's why. It's like I come up with analogies. World War II, in the beginning of the war, even before the war, the best pilots on the planet were the Japanese pilots. They would have tens of thousands of people apply for their pilot training. They would only accept, maybe 1,000 and some. Then they would whittle those down to maybe 500, and maybe 250 would graduate. They had intense training so that those pilots, they believed strongly in the idea of the one really well-trained pilot over having a bunch of pilots that were mediocre. And they could fly in such a way that they could hit a dinner plate from, what was it, like 300 meters in their planes, the way they were flying. They were quite simply the best pilots. And in the beginning, they had the best plane, the Zero, the Mitsubishi, I forget its full number, but Zero. And they could out-climb, out-maneuver. They were faster than anything any of the other countries had. And you saw in the beginning of the war how devastating it was for the British, for the Chinese, for the Americans, because they could not keep up with the training of the individual or the machine that they were flying. And so there was this one man, and he went by Thatch, was his nickname, but he sat there every night trying to come up with a way to overcome the fact that the pilots were better and the planes were better. And he would do little matchsticks on his table every night, and then the next day they would practice it, and they would have half of the planes throttled to halfway to kind of symbolize the difference between the American planes and the Japanese planes. And every day, those being in the Japanese side, would just devastate the others. And then one night, he comes up with something. They call it took on the name the Thatch Weave. But quite simply, they used to have like 3 or 4, it paired 2 pilots together. And the idea was that you would be watching your tailmates, your wingman's tail. And so they would kind of come back and forth, covering each other's tails. And this simple act of flying together and really paying attention to your wingman as the most important thing changed everything. The Japanese had been taught very much as this is a battle of samurais. We take this on one-on-one. A dogfight is 2 samurais with swords. Suddenly, the Thatch Weave, as they called it, turned it on into a 2-on-1. And the numbers just went from incredible Japanese victories to overwhelming American victories, or British, or whoever was using because even though they had worse planes, even though they had less training, when 2 of them came together, they were so much more powerful than just one. We forget what a difference it makes when we come together as a community. The things we can do. We look around and, admittedly, we're a pretty small community. But we are so much more because we intentionally come together to support one another, to worship with one another, to pay attention to one another, to be a place of refuge. There have been so many times when I've had someone come to my office in the prison and say, if I just had some place to go to on the outside, someone to tell me what was happening, someone for me to make myself vulnerable to, I believe I would not be in prison right now. But because we've been so isolated, because we have lived in such a way that we become smaller and smaller, the communities are disappearing. I think I've mentioned this before, but in my hometown where I grew up, it used to be that when there was a funeral, 500-600 people would show up. The church would be full, they would have overflow because everyone was connected in some way. Whether you liked the person or not, you went to the funeral to show support. And now most places, they don't even do funerals because we don't have that same sense of being interwoven or weaved into each other's life. Loneliness is a pandemic. I was reading an article where it said so many health issues, so many of society difficulties, so much mental struggles come from people being alone. So what do people do? A lot of them turn to AI now. In fact, there are AI programs. Kellen and you get annoyed when I say AI because what they say, it's all a no I. It's programs. It's numbers that are coming up. There's no real, but they have these programs. They have these algorithms that will respond to whatever people want. And I'm going to say this word wrong, but AIs are like sycophants. Sycophants? Sycophants. But they just basically tell people what they want. And one of the guys was testing it. John Oliver did a show on this. And he used the example of, one of the people wrote in, they said, you know, or talking to the AI, I said, I'm going to sell on a stick. Manure on a stick. They used a different word. But the AI then responded by saying, that's genius, that's brilliant. You should invest $30,000 into this business plan because the computer will just tell you what you want to hear, which is very different than having people that actually know and care about you, supporting you and lifting you up, not just giving you empty words, but actually caring about you and being a place to share. The thing I struggle with sermon writing is it calls for introspection. Thank you. Thankfully, it does not call for a grasp of the English language, but it does call for us to be aware. It calls for me to be aware of myself. And up until this point, my sermon is exactly as I said it on Thursday night. But here my sermon goes sideways, and it becomes, in some sense, a confessional. And part of it, Noah's not here, but it's Noah's fault. I'm blaming Noah. Because on Friday, we were celebrating Mika's birthday, and we ordered sushi from Spoon, which sells sushi at a gas station, but still some of the best sushi in Moncton. But we ordered it, and then we went to pick up some ice cream because Mika has a weird birthday cake that requires mint chocolate chip ice cream. So we were in the superstore, and I'm walking, and Mika and Ian are with me, and I see Noah. Noah yells, "Hey, Gordon!" And I go, "Oh, hey, Noah!" And then I just keep walking. And I was like, oh, okay, because I got to get the ice cream, then we got to go get the sushi, and I realized that night, I'm like, something's bothering, and it's that I had not stopped. And it's the realization that, this is something that I am lousy at. And I make that confession. I understand how important it is. And up until this point, like I said, the sermon was just running, kind of community, we need each other. But then I realized how I sometimes struggle with being that face. I am an introvert, true and through. And like Sunday afternoons, I'm white. I enjoy this. I honestly love you all incredibly much. And then by Sunday afternoon, I'm like, okay, I gotta go and sleep. But just because I'm an introvert, I think maybe because I am an introvert, I realize how important it is to have a community. Because, when the pandemic came, I was kind of content to just sit in my little office and be on my own. It was like, oh, it's not so bad. But I realized how much better I am when I am with you. How you bring out the better part of me. How you give me a place to share my strengths, and just as importantly, to share my weaknesses. We need each other. And sometimes it goes that it takes work. It takes getting out of our own head. It takes saying, hey, Noah, and talking for 5 minutes to Noah and Natasha. And Norma's still kind of quiet, but But it takes time away from just kind of focusing on what we want, because the payback is so incredible. And it's one of the gifts that the church is. The church is the place where we come and we belong, as we are. Extrovert will welcome you too. Introverts, people who have these gifts, people who have those gifts, we come together as, I was going to say as dysfunctional individuals, and we form a dysfunctional community. But it is in there that we find the blessing of God. Because this is what God has given us. Not just God has called us to this as a task, God has given us the church as a gift. Like going up in the upper room and praying together. Like having the importance of a community, even when the community is flawed, because we are all flawed. We need others. And it's in the recognition of that that we start to realize that this is a gift that God has given us. I am, again, in my long journey trying to learn French. And what I have tried in the past desperately is to do it on my own. Because learning French, speaking French to other people is an act of humiliation and disappointment. You think I slaughter English. But I have realized this time, because I have to have it done, that I can't do it on my own. That there is no way I can learn to speak a language without actually speaking it to other people. And even as much as I don't want to, I need to. And so now, someone that Pam knows, we've hired a tutor, and she is gracious and kind, and she is completely unaware of how much pain and agony she is in for trying to teach me French. But I need to do that, because if I don't, I can't do it on my own. And if I can't learn French on my own, how do I think I can be a follower of Christ on my own? I can't. I can, but not nearly in the same way that I am when I am walking with each one of you. And I confess to you my weaknesses. There are so many. And some of them is that sometimes I just kind of narrow in on my own world. And I apologize. But because of that, I need you even more. You are an amazing congregation. And I'm not just saying that because you listen to me. I'm saying that because you really are. But the one thing that I would say we should work on is being the place that shares our greatness with others. There was an inmate who came recently. He, tease him a lot, he's of Baptist background, and he went, the first church he went to was a Baptist church, and then he came to ours, and then he's gone since to a large Baptist church. And it was interesting. The Baptist church is what he grew up with, what he feels comfortable with. But he says, kind of in amazement, he says to me, I think the place I felt most at home was in your church. Because they didn't make me feel different. They just, kind of treated me like, oh. We have, as I said, an incredible congregation. And the world needs this. I am not a believer of the church needs to grow in numbers because numbers is somehow a sign of faithfulness. I am a believer in that what we offer the world desperately needs. And so that if people are able to come and we are able to share that, we are called to do so. We offer something here. You offer something here better than I offer it. But there are so many people that are so lonely, that have no place to go to, no place to kind of feel like they belong. And we have this. But to do that, that means we have to welcome them in and change who we are, because every time someone comes in, it changes us. Every individual who walks through that door makes us different. And we have to be at peace with that, even as we are sharing the gifts that God has given us. It's fitting that I am doing this sermon today, that David and Patty have shown up, because I would say that by far the people who have invited the most people to our congregation times 10 is David and Patty. Because that you have a natural way of doing that, of which I am incredibly envious of. You just seem to kind of say, oh, people should come here. But if you do the job of getting them here, we should at least make sure that we do the job of making sure that they feel like this is home. Because it's God's place. We're God's children. And so anyone who walks through here belongs here. Simon grew up very much with the idea that he needed to not have help of others. It's how he was raised, that you do things on your own. And he prided himself on always being able to do that. And so when Simon had his own apartment and he had his workplace and he would go between them, he had some friends, but he always was very careful not to need anyone else. He left home when he was 17. He didn't need other people at that point. He paid for his own education. He did everything by himself, and there was a great sense of pride that he had in being able to do that. And then one day, his pride was taken away by a puddle of water on the top of stairs, 3 flights to be exact. And down he went. Broke an arm, broke a leg, cracked a bunch of ribs, was in the hospital for 3 weeks. And he hated it. Because in the hospital, when you have your arm in a cast and your leg is, and you can't move and everything hurts and you need people. And he was desperate to get out of there. And so he actually signed himself out earlier than they thought he should. And as soon as he got back to his own apartment, he took a taxi and he's walking with a cane and he's limping in and he can only use one arm. And he sees that his mailbox, because it's been 3 weeks, is overflowing. So he opens up the key and it all pours down. And then he's now has a dilemma. He's holding on to his cane, he has a broken leg, a broken arm, and there's all this mail on the floor. And he's like, what do I do? How do I get my mail? And he realized he hadn't really thought it through. And he's sitting there, and suddenly one of his neighbors who came by, and he's known this person for 3 years and still doesn't know his name. They live on the same floor, three doors down. And his neighbor comes by and says, hey, do you need a hand? Simon goes, no, I'm good. On instinct, because that's what you say. That's what you do. So his neighbor kind of looked and said, oh, okay. And was walking towards the elevator. When he stopped, he goes, no, man, you're not okay. You're staring at your mail. You're not able to pick that mail up. And Simon goes, yeah, I guess you're right. The guy comes up and says, hey, I'm Robert. And he picks up his mail. We're on the same floor, so why don't we ride the elevator together? And Simon's like, yeah, okay. And Simon's kind of, he's feeling humbled because he needed help. And he gets in and Robert says, yeah, I was in a car accident once. I was like laid up for 6 months. I moved back home. My mother still talks about it. I completely understand what you're going through. And he's talking and stuff. And he goes, look, they get to their floor. If you need anything, I'm 3 doors down. I'm serious. We've lived beside each other. I didn't even know your name was Simon till just now. But knock, please. Simon goes, yeah, I will, with no intention of knocking. 3 hours later, there was a knock on his door. He opened it up, and there was Robert. Robert was like, hey, I'm going to go get groceries. I'm guessing you can't. Do you want me to pick you up something? And I'm not paying for you, but I will. And somebody goes, yeah, okay. and gives him the list, and Robert goes. And in the next 3 or 4 days, Simon actually met 4 of his neighbors that he had seen but never talked to, because at different times, Simon had needed help. At one point, he had stuff in his arms. He couldn't even push the elevator button. And Nancy, who was just down the 2 floors up, said, here, let me help you. And then it's that thing, you know, when somebody has an accident, they have a cast, suddenly everybody wants to talk to you because they're like, oh, I broke my arm when, and suddenly Simon's kind of getting to know people in his apartment. And then he goes to work. And again, he goes to work earlier than he should because he has this great deep sense that that's what gives him value. And he gets there, and it's the same thing. He can't do a bunch of his work. And other co-workers start to help him out. And they're commenting and they're talking, and one of them even says, you know, Simon, I always thought you were a complete jerk. But you're actually not a bad guy once you get to know you, but you know, you should break your body more often. And Simon goes, maybe I should have. And he starts to get more and more friendly, and he realizes he enjoys going to his apartment. Because now he's seeing people that, and even if it's just a hi, it makes a difference. And work is completely different now. And then one day he's going to, I'm holding my arm down like it's broken. I'm like, what are you doing, Gord? One day he goes to the physiotherapist, and the physiotherapist says to him, you know, I think in 2 weeks, you know, the cast come off and you'll be pretty much back to normal. We'll see you next week. And next week, physiotherapist noticed that Simon, who had been progressing so well, suddenly stopped progressing. The physiotherapist said, what happened this week? And Simon says, I don't know. And she pushes him a little bit. She goes, no, something happened. You were progressing and now you're not. Simon goes, well, when I get better, I'm going to be alone again. And he thought the physiotherapist would laugh at him. And she says, oh, I completely understand. You need people now. You have an excuse to need people. But the reality is you've needed people all your life. You just didn't accept it. So accept it. Continue. And if you're worried about the fact that people won't talk to you anymore because you don't have a cast, learn stuff about them. Name of their dog, their family and stuff, so that when you see them, you can say, hey, how's your dog doing or whatever. But find reasons to keep talking to them besides just the fact that you broke your body. Or else I am pretty sure that you're going to throw yourself down some steps again. And Simon did. And when his casts were off, he realized that he didn't need a broken arm. He didn't need a cast or a cane. He didn't need the idea that he could do it all on his own to get by in this world. In fact, he did better without all of those things, by simply acknowledging that he needs other people in his life. As a church, in some ways, we're kind of like Simon. We sometimes think that we are complete on our own. And we do well. But we also need to share this burning gift that we have been given, this calling to make a difference. Because there are so many people that are hurting, our brothers and our sisters, who are lost, who are alone, who have no place to go. And the reality is that if we have an excuse to invite them in, they make our lives better as we strive to make their lives better. This isn't easy. Never has been, probably never will be. For some of us, it seems almost impossible. But as I have committed myself to learning French, so I am committing myself to being someone who is more aware, to get past some of my it's who I am, and I accept that, but also to work as not use that as simply an excuse. And as a church, we are a small, wonderful congregation, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't also be looking at ways of including others.